The heat in the New Guinea jungle was something solid, a wet wall that pasted your uniform to your skin and made every breath taste like rotting vegetation. But what weighed heavier than the heat, the gear, or the constant fear of a Japanese ambush that day was the laughter. It was coming from my own side, from the white infantry unit I had been attached to, strictly for logistical support. To them, I was just there to dig latrines and haul crates. They were laughing at my weapon. It wasn't a standard-issue M1 Garand, and it wasn't a lightweight carbine. It was a monstrosity I had cobbled together in my spare time. It had the stock of an old salvaged 1903 Springfield, a barrel I had hand-sanded and adjusted to float freely, and a cheap civilian hunting scope my daddy had mailed from home, secured with metal hose clamps I'd scavenged from a wrecked Jeep. It looked like junk. It looked like a poor man's toy. "Hey, Washington," hollered Corporal Miller, a big corn-fed boy with tobacco stains on his teeth. "You gonna go squirrel hunting with that fishing pole? Careful it don't blow up in your black face." The laughter rippled through the clearing. The whole platoon dropped their guard for a second to mock the grease monkey. I didn't answer. My eyes were locked on the tree line 300 yards out. I had seen the glint. A tiny, unnatural reflection that none of these men, too busy being cruel, had noticed. I raised my homemade rifle. The weight was perfect, balanced exactly for my arm. I pressed my cheek against the wood I had carved myself. "Put that down, soldier, you'll give away our position," Miller barked, the smile vanishing. I ignored the order. I exhaled all the air from my lungs. The world went silent. Their cruelty faded. There was only the trembling reticle and the leaf-covered helmet hidden between the palm fronds. The sound of my shot was dry, distinct from the standard infantry rifles. Before the echo died, a body tumbled from a high tree, falling like a sack of potatoes and hitting the jungle floor with a dull thud. An Arisaka rifle clattered beside him. The silence that followed in our clearing was absolute. No one was laughing anymore. Corporal Miller looked at the distant body, then at me, and then at the scrap metal in my hands. I worked the bolt, ejecting the smoking casing, and looked them in the eye. The war had just changed for us. They doubted my skill and mocked my creation. But the jungle doesn't forgive arrogance, it only rewards precision. If you want to hear the true story of how black ingenuity and courage turned the tide of forgotten battles, hit that subscribe button and like the video. Let's honor those who fought two wars, one against the enemy and one against hate. My name is Elias Tech Washington. I wasn't elite infantry. I wasn't a ranger. Officially, I was a third-class mechanic in a segregated quartermaster unit, serving in the green hell of the South Pacific 1943. To the United States Army, men like me were good for fixing trucks, cooking stew, and carrying ammo for the real soldiers to fight. They said we didn't have the discipline for combat, or the intelligence for tactics. But I grew up in Mississippi, hunting just to put meat on the table. I understood ballistics before I learned to read, and I knew that the mass-produced rifles the Army gave us weren't precise enough for the cat-and-mouse game we were playing against the Imperial Japanese snipers. They were ghosts in the trees. They picked off our officers and vanished. Morale was in the dirt. Sick of seeing bodies come back in bags, I started working at night. I scavenged discarded parts. I used my mechanic's tools. I built a weapon that was ugly, strange, and according to my superiors, non-regulation. They threatened to court-martial me for destroying government property. They laughed at my hillbilly musket. All of that changed that week on Bougainville. Our column was pinned down. Officers were dropping one by one, hit by a squad of elite Japanese marksmen that no one could see. We were stuck in the mud, dying. That's when the commander, desperate and out of options, looked at me and my strange gun. "Washington," he said, swallowing his pride, "see if you can do something with that piece of junk." What followed were 5 days of hunting. 5 days where I, a black mechanic, became the guardian angel for 200 white men. This is the story of how my homemade rifle silenced the laughter and cleared the forest. Here is Chapter 1. Chapter 1. The Junkyard Dog. The jungle of Bougainville wasn't just a place. It was a living, breathing creature that hated you. If the Japanese didn't kill you, the island would try. It was a tangle of mangroves, razor grass, and mud so deep it could suck a boot right off your foot. We were the 24th Infantry Regiment, a segregated unit. But for this operation, my platoon from the service company had been loaned out to support a white infantry battalion pushing inland along the Numa Numa Trail. That was the Army's polite way of saying we were there to be mules. We carried the crates of K rations, the heavy ammo boxes for the 30 cal machine guns and the spare mortar rounds. We walked 10 paces behind the white troops, swallowing their dust, listening to their jokes about us. My hands were always black with grease. That's how I got the name Tech. While the other guys played cards or tried to sleep in the humid muck during downtime, I was always tinkering. I fixed Zippo lighters, I unjammed bars that had rusted shut, and I worked on it, my rifle. I called it the Bastard. It started life as a standard Springfield M1903 that had been run over by a half-track. The stock was shattered, the barrel bent. The quartermaster told me to toss it in the scrap pile. Instead, I took it to my tent. I found a discarded barrel from a damaged sniper variant, the A4, but it lacked the mount. I spent 3 weeks hand-sanding the inner channel of a replacement stock I scavenged, using sandpaper I'd stolen from the motor pool. I floated that barrel so it didn't touch the wood at any point. This meant that when the barrel heated up from firing, it wouldn't warp against the stock and throw off the aim. It was a trick an old gunsmith in Jackson taught me. The scope was the real kicker. It was a Weaver 330C, a civilian scope, not military issue. My pop sent it to me inside a hollowed-out loaf of bread in a care package. It wasn't rugged, but the glass was clear. I mounted it low. Using modified rings I filed down myself to keep my profile small. "Washington, quit playing with your toys and get these crates moving," Sergeant O'Malley shouted, kicking mud onto my boots. It was the morning of the 3rd day of the push. We were moving into a sector called Hell's Pocket. The foliage was so dense you couldn't see the sky. The air smelled of sulfur and rotting coconuts. The tension was different that morning. The white soldiers up front, Baker Company, were twitchy. They had lost 3 guys the day before to tree ghosts. No gunshots heard, just men dropping with holes in their necks. The Japanese snipers here used reduced charge ammunition to cut down the noise and flash. They tied themselves into the canopy, sometimes staying there for days rotting in their own filth, waiting for a target of opportunity. I shouldered my pack, the Bastard slung across my chest, barrel down to keep the rain out. "Why you even carry that heavy thing, Tech?" whispered Big Marcus, a fellow supply runner walking beside me. "You got your M1 carbine. That scrap metal gonna get you killed. Carbine shoots straight for 200 yards maybe," I whispered back, wiping sweat from my eyes. "Those trees are taller than that. I need to reach out and touch someone." Marcus shook his head. "Just keep your head down. Let the white boys do the shooting. That's what they paid for." But they weren't doing the shooting. They were doing the dying. Around 0900 hours, the column halted. We were in a depression, a natural bowl surrounded by high ridges covered in thick vines. It was a perfect kill box. The order came down the line. "Take 5. Check water." Corporal Miller, the one who had mocked me earlier, walked past us toward the rear to grab a smoke. He looked at me, then at my rifle, and smirked. "Still hauling that firewood, Washington? I bet you $5 it don't even fire." He didn't wait for an answer. He turned his back to me to light his cigarette. That was the moment the world exploded. Not with a bang, but with a thwack. The lieutenant standing near the radio operator 40 yards ahead jerked violently. His helmet spun off his head. A split second later, the dry crack of a Japanese Arisaka echoed off the canyon walls. Then another. Then 3 more. "Sniper, get down!" Chaos took over. Men dove into the mud. The green wall of the jungle erupted with invisible death. There were no muzzle flashes. No smoke, just bullets tearing through flesh. The radio operator screamed, clutching his stomach. A machine gunner tried to set up his tripod and took a round through the shoulder. "Where's it coming from?" Miller screamed, crawling on his belly, his face pressed into the dirt. "I can't see him. I can't see him." Baker Company opened fire blindly, 50 rifles firing into the trees. Leaves shredded, bark flew, but the Japanese fire didn't stop. It was disciplined, cold. They were picking us apart. I was behind a thick root of a banyan tree. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. This was it. This was the war I wasn't supposed to fight. I looked at Marcus. He was curled up in a ball, praying. I looked at the Bastard. The logic of the mechanic took over. Problem. Enemy concealed in elevation. Solution. Identify pattern and neutralize. I didn't fire blindly. I watched. I watched the way the ferns moved on the ridge to the left. The wind was blowing east. but one patch of palm fronds moved west. Recoil. Someone was up there. I crawled forward. Mud soaked my chest. I moved past the supply crates, past the shivering privates until I was near Miller. "Get back, you idiot," Miller hissed. I ignored him. I rolled onto my back, sliding into a groove between two rocks. It was an awkward position, shooting upward, but it gave me stability. I brought the scope to my eye. The Weaver scope was narrow, the field of view terrible, but the magnification brought the ridge right into my face. I scanned the tree. Nothing. Just green. Wait. There. A slightly darker patch of brown against the tree trunk. A unnatural shape. A knee. An elbow. I adjusted the focus ring. The image sharpened. It was a leg, wrapped in burlap camouflage, tied to a branch about 60 feet up. The sniper was leaning out, tracking the medic who was trying to reach the lieutenant. I clicked the safety off on the Springfield. The sound was a tiny metal tick, lost in the screaming and the gunfire. I breathed in through my nose. I calculated the angle. Shooting uphill meant the bullet would hit high if I didn't aim low. Gravity had less time to drag the bullet down. I adjusted my point of aim to the bottom of where the torso should be. The Japanese sniper shifted. He was bolt-actioning a fresh round. He was going to kill the medic. I squeezed the trigger. The break was crisp. 2 pounds of pressure just like I had tuned it. Boom. The recoil punched my shoulder. The sound was deeper, throatier than the Garan's. Through the scope, I saw the impact. The burlap shape jerked backward. A mist of pink sprayed onto the dark bark of the tree. The sniper slumped forward, dead weight testing the ropes that held him. His rifle slipped from his grip and tumbled down, bouncing off branches until it hit the ground. The incoming fire from that specific tree stopped. I didn't celebrate. I worked the bolt. Clack, clack. Brass flew. Fresh round in. Did you get him?" Miller asked, his voice trembling. He was staring at me wide-eyed. "That was one," I said, my voice sounding strange to my own ears. Calm. Detached. "There's at least 3 more, and they know where we are now." I scanned the ridge again. The jungle had gone quiet for a heartbeat, surprised by the sudden death of one of their ghosts. But the battle wasn't over. It was just starting. We were pinned down, the officers were hit, and the only thing standing between Baker Company and a massacre was a black mechanic with a rifle made of junk. "Miller," I said, not asking for permission this time. "I need a spotter. Grab your binoculars. Watch the tree line at 2 o'clock. Miller hesitated. He looked at his stripes, then at my grease-stained collar. The racial hierarchy of the U.S. Army said he should order me back to the rear. But the law of the jungle said I was the only one hitting back. He grabbed his binoculars. 2 o'clock, I'm on it. For the first time in my life, a white man listened to me. Not out of respect, but out of fear. And for the next 5 days, that fear would be my only currency. The silence that followed that first shot was heavier than the gunfire. It was a stunned, ringing silence. For a few seconds, the war paused. The Japanese were recalculating. The Americans were in disbelief. "Don't move," I whispered to Miller, barely moving my lips. "They're looking for the muzzle flash. They're looking for me." Miller was shaking. The binoculars rattled against his helmet rim. I don't see the others. The jungle just swallowed them up. They didn't leave, Corporal. They're repositioning. Look for the birds. Look for vines shaking against the wind." My heart was thumping a rhythm against the wet earth. Thud, 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 thud. I cycled the bolt of the bastard slowly, shielding the action with my hand so the brass casing wouldn't catch the sunlight and flash. I caught the hot metal in my palm. It burned, a sharp, grounding pain. I pocketed the spent casing. I never left brass behind. It was a habit from poaching deer on land where I wasn't welcome. Leave no trace, or you get caught. Here, leaving brass meant giving the enemy a shine to aim at. "Washington!" It was Sergeant O'Malley's voice, hoarse and panicked from down the line. "Get that damn gun working again. We got movement on the left flank." "Keep your head down, Sarge," I yelled back, breaking protocol. "If you move, you die." A bullet zipped past O'Malley's ear, burying itself in a crate of K-rations. He dove face first into the mud, cursing. "See?" I muttered to myself. "Left flank, about 200 yards, low ground." I shifted my body. The mud sucked at my fatigues. I had to move the bastard inch by inch. If I moved too fast, the movement would stand out against the static green background. The Weaver scope was fogging up in the humidity. I cursed silently. and wiped it with my thumb. "Miller," I said, "look at the roots of that big mahogany tree, the one with the split trunk. Tell me what you see." Miller adjusted the focus on his field glasses. He was sweating profusely, the salt stinging his eyes. "I see dirt, roots. Wait." He stiffened. "Something black. Looks like a barrel tip sticking out of the root system spider hole." Got him. I didn't see the barrel yet, but I saw the shadow. It was a spider hole, a dugout position concealed by a lid of woven grass and mud. The sniper was practically underground, shooting through a slit no wider than a letter slot. This was a harder shot. The first guy was high up, outlined against the sky. This one was part of the earth, and he was aiming at our machine gun crew. "Windage?" Miller asked. The question surprised me. He was trying to be useful. He was trying to speak my language. "Left to right, maybe 5 miles an hour," I replied, my eye glued to the scope. "Distance is 180. I'm holding dead on. The bullet won't drift much at this range." I settled the crosshairs. The reticle on the civilian scope was fine, much thinner than the thick posts on the military scopes. It allowed for precision, but it was hard to see in the dappled shade. I had to trust my instincts. I aimed for the darkness of the slot. The enemy rifle flared, a muzzle flash from the hole, a scream from our line. One of the machine gun loaders went down, clutching his thigh. Now, while the Japanese sniper was working his bolt, I fired. Crack. The sound of my rifle was becoming the rhythm of our survival. The bullet slammed into the mud and wood of the spider hole cover. I didn't see a body fall this time. I just saw the camouflage lid collapse inward. The rifle barrel that had been poking out disappeared. "Hit!" Miller yelled, a little too loud. "You collapsed the hole on him. He's either dead or buried alive," I said, working the bolt again. 2 down. For the next 2 hours, it became a slow-motion duel. The heat became unbearable. We ran out of water in our canteens, but no one dared to crawl back to the water trailer. The jungle steamed. The rest of the platoon, white soldiers from New York and Pennsylvania, farm boys and city kids, lay flat, pinned by fear. They were spectators in their own battle. Every time a helmet rose, a bullet snapped the air. The Japanese snipers were trying to figure out where the counterfire was coming from, but I kept moving. Shoot. Crawl 10 yards. Reload. Wait. Shoot again. By 1400 hours, I had taken 3 shots. I had 3 confirmed hits, but the enemy was adapting. They stopped shooting at the infantry and started hunting me. I was setting up for a 4th shot near a rotting log when the bark next to my face exploded. Splinters sprayed into my cheek, drawing blood. "Jesus!" Miller scrambled back. Another shot hit the ground between my legs. They had triangulated me. "Move!" I roared, grabbing my rifle and rolling into a depression filled with stagnant rainwater. Miller tumbled in after me, splashing black water everywhere. We lay there, gasping for air, chest to chest in the mud. For a moment, the racial lines blurred into nothing. We were just 2 terrified mammals hiding from a predator. Miller looked at the blood on my cheek. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a dirty handkerchief. "You're bleeding, Tech," he said. I looked at the handkerchief, then at his eyes. The mockery was gone. In its place was a desperate dependence. He needed me to stay alive so he could stay alive. "I'm fine," I said, pushing the cloth away. "Save it for a gut shot." We lay there for an hour, the sun beating down on us. The insects were relentless. Mosquitoes the size of dimes feasted on our necks. "Where did you learn to shoot like that?" Miller asked, his voice low. "Army didn't teach you that. They don't teach your people marksmanship." "My people?" I looked at him hard. "My people keep the world running while you all sleep, Miller. I learned in the bayous, hunting hogs. A hog is smarter than a deer and meaner than a man. You miss a hog, he comes for you. Taught me to make the first shot count." Miller nodded slowly, absorbing that. "Well, I'm glad you're a good shot, because the lieutenant is dead." I froze. "What?" "Radio guy crawled over while you were moving. Latrell Thompson took one in the throat right at the start. Sergeant O'Malley is in charge now, but he's pinned down with the mortars. We're on our own Washington." The weight of that settled on me. A segregated black mechanic was effectively the tip of the spear for a leaderless white platoon. "We can't stay here," I said, checking the action of my rifle. The mud was getting everywhere. If the bastard jammed, we were dead. "Night is coming. If we don't clear this ridge before sunset, they'll come down here with knives and grenades. They'll butcher us in the dark." "So what do we do?" Miller asked. He looked like a child asking a parent. We flushed them out. I need you to do something stupid, Miller. What? I need you to be the bait. Miller's face went pale beneath the grime. Go to hell. Listen to me. I grabbed his collar. There's at least one more sniper, maybe an officer. He's controlling the others. He's smart. He hasn't fired yet. He's waiting for a high-value target. He's waiting for someone to take charge. And you want me to pretend to be in charge? I want you to take your helmet off. Put it on a stick. Raise it up near the machine gun nest. Make it look like an officer inspecting the line. If he shoots, I see him. If I see him, I kill him. If I kill him, we go home. Miller looked at the helmet in his hands. He looked at the dead bodies scattered in the clearing. He looked at me. If you miss, Washington. If you miss, he realizes it's a trick and puts the next one in my real head. I won't miss, I said. I didn't feel the confidence I projected, but I needed him to believe it. I built this gun. I know where the bullet goes. Miller took a deep breath. He crawled back toward the machine gun position, keeping low. I moved in the opposite direction, flanking wide to the right, climbing a small rise that gave me a view of the entire canopy. I settled in. The sun was dipping low, casting long, confusing shadows across the kill box. The glare was gone, but the contrast was tricky. I watched Miller. He was trembling, but he did it. He found a broken branch, jammed his helmet onto it, and slowly, hesitantly, raised it above the log he was hiding behind. He even yelled, "Sarge, get that squad moving," mimicking an officer's command. It was a terrible acting job. But to a sniper 300 yards away looking through a telescopic sight, a silhouette is a silhouette. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3. Nothing. Come on, I thought. Take the bait. Maybe he was too smart. Maybe he knew. Then, a flash. High up in a palm tree almost directly above where we had entered the clearing, the muzzle flash was bright in the dimming light. Miller's helmet spun off the stick with a metallic clang. Miller yelped and dropped to the dirt. I swung the bastard around. I didn't have time for a perfect sight picture. I saw the movement in the palm fronds. The sniper was racking his bolt for a follow-up. I didn't aim for the man. I aimed for the trunk of the palm tree just below where he was perched. I was using armor-piercing rounds I'd stolen from the machine gun belt. Crack. The bullet punched through the soft wood of the palm tree. A scream echoed through the valley. It was a high, terrifying sound. The sniper fell from the tree, but his leg got caught in his safety rope. He was left dangling upside down, swinging like a pendulum, screaming in Japanese, clutching a shattered pelvis. The screaming unnerved everyone. It broke the spell. "Fire!" O'Malley screamed from somewhere. "Light him up." Every gun in the American platoon opened up on the dangling, screaming figure. The bars, the Garands, the carbines, they shredded the tree and the man. It was overkill. It was fear turned into violence. When the shooting stopped, the silence returned. But it was different now. The ridge was clear. We had broken their hold. I lowered my rifle. The barrel was hot enough to blister skin. I leaned my head back against the mud and closed my eyes for a second. Tech? I opened my eyes. Big Marcus was crawling towards me. He had a canteen. "You crazy son of a bitch," Marcus whispered, a grin splitting his face. "You actually did it." He handed me the water. I drank greedily. It tasted like iodine and tin, but it was the best thing I'd ever tasted. Miller crawled over a moment later. He didn't have his helmet. He looked shaken, but alive. He looked at Marcus, then at me. He hesitated, then reached out a hand. "Good shooting. Tech," he said. It was the first time he'd used my nickname without a sneer. I looked at his hand. It was dirty, white, and trembling. I took it. "We ain't done, Miller," I said, pulling my hand back and grabbing my rifle. "Sun's down. Now the real war starts." As the shadows turned to total blackness, the jungle came alive with different sounds. We had survived the day, but we were still deep in enemy territory and the Japanese owned the night. Night in the Pacific didn't fall. It crashed down like a heavy curtain. 1 minute you could see your hand in front of your face, the next you were blind. And in that blindness, the jungle changed. It ceased to be a collection of trees and mud and became a living, hostile entity. We dug in. Without an officer, Sergeant O'Malley formed a tight perimeter, a foxhole circle. It was a standard defensive formation, but these men were rattled. They were supply clerks and truck drivers forced into infantry roles, or infantrymen who had lost their nerve. They jumped at the sound of a falling coconut. They fired at shadows. I sat in a foxhole on the northern edge of the perimeter. my back against the wet clay. Big Marcus was next to me, clutching his carbine so tight his knuckles were ashen. "You think they're coming?" Marcus whispered. "They're always coming," I said, running my thumb over the bolt of the bastard. I had stripped the scope off for the night. In the dark, glass was useless. It just gathered moisture and reflected moonlight. I needed iron sights and instinct now. O'Malley crawled over to our hole. "Washington," he hissed, "I'm putting you on point. You got eyes like a damn cat. If anything moves, you kill it. Don't wait for orders." "Understood, Sarge." He lingered for a second. And, "Hey, good work today. I'll make sure it goes in the report." "Just make sure we have ammo, Sarge," I replied dryly. He nodded and crawled away. A commendation? A report? It didn't matter. In Mississippi, a commendation wouldn't buy me a seat at the front of the bus. Out here, it wouldn't stop a bayonet. The hours dragged. The jungle was a cacophony of shrieks, buzzes, and clicks, but I wasn't listening to the noise. I was listening to the gaps in the noise. My daddy taught me that. When the crickets stop, the predator is moving. Around 0200, the insects on the left flank went silent. I stiffened. I kicked Marcus's boot gently. He woke with a start, and I clamped a hand over his mouth. I pointed into the blackness. We waited. The humidity was suffocating. Then I heard it. The suck of mud releasing a boot. Soft. Deliberate. They were inside the perimeter. The Japanese infiltrators were masters of stealth. They would crawl on their bellies naked save for a loincloth covered in grease and mud, carrying only a knife or a grenade. They didn't want a firefight. They wanted to slit throats while we slept. "Flashlight," I whispered to Marcus. "Get ready." I raised the Springfield. I couldn't see a target, just a wall of black. I leveled the rifle at waist height, pointing it toward the silence. "Now!" Marcus clicked the heavy L-shaped military flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness like a physical blow. It illuminated a nightmare. Less than 10 feet away, a Japanese soldier was crouching, a combat knife clenched in his teeth, a grenade in his hand. He was staring right at us, eyes wide with adrenaline. Behind him, 2 more were rising from the grass. Boom. I didn't aim. I pointed and fired. The heavy .30-06 round caught the lead infiltrator in the chest, lifting him off his feet and throwing him backward into the others. "Contact! Inside the wire!" I screamed, working the bolt. The perimeter dissolved into chaos. Flares went up, casting eerie, dancing shadows that made the trees look like skeletons. The Japanese strategy shifted instantly from stealth to suicide charge. "Banzai! Banzai!" The scream was blood-curdling. It wasn't a battle cry. It was a death wish. A shape lunged at our foxhole. I didn't have time to shoot. I swung the heavy wooden stock of the Springfield like a baseball bat. It connected with a sickening crunch against a jawbone. The man went down, but he clawed at my legs, trying to pull the pin on a grenade pressed to his chest. "Kick him! Kick him!" I yelled at Marcus. Marcus, fueled by sheer panic, stomped on the man's wrist. The grenade rolled away into the mud. I scrambled out of the hole, grabbed the grenade, and hurled it blindly into the darkness. Thump crack. The explosion flashed orange, silencing the screams from that direction. But the fight wasn't over. To my right, I heard the terrifying sound of American screams. I spun around. A young private named Jenkins, a kid, barely 19, who had shared his cigarettes with me the day before, was struggling with a shadow. The infiltrator was on top of him. I saw the glint of a knife. "Help! Tech! Help me!" Jenkins screamed. I raised my rifle. The shot was impossible. They were grappling, rolling in the mud. If I fired, I might hit the kid. "Get off him!" I roared, charging forward. I abandoned the rifle and pulled my own trench knife. I hit the pair like a linebacker. I drove my shoulder into the Japanese soldier, knocking him off Jenkins. We tumbled into the dirt. He was strong, wiry, and smelled of sweat and earth. He slashed at my face, cutting a shallow line across my forehead. Blood blinded my left eye. I fought with the desperation of a drowning man. I managed to pin his arm, brought my knife down, and ended it. I gasped for air, wiping the blood from my eyes. I turned to Jenkins. "You okay, kid? Get up. We gotta move." Jenkins didn't move. He was sitting up, looking at his stomach. The flare light flickered above us, dying out. "Tech," he whispered. "It's cold." I crawled over to him. My hands were slippery. I tried to find the wound to apply pressure, but there was too much blood. The knife had done its work before I got there. I'm here, Jenkins, I got you. I lied. Medic, we need a medic! But the medics were busy. Everyone was busy dying or killing. Jenkins looked at me. His eyes were losing focus. I wrote a letter to my mom. It's in my pack. You take it? You'll take it yourself, I said, my voice cracking. Hold on. He gripped my wrist. His hand was white, mine was black, and both were covered in the same red blood. Tell her. I didn't run. Then his grip went slack. I sat there for a moment in the middle of the madness, the sounds of gunfire muffled by the rushing in my ears. I had killed 5 snipers. I had saved the platoon twice. I was the best shot on the island, but I couldn't save the kid 3 feet away from me. That was the lesson, that was the turning point. In war, skill only buys you time, it doesn't buy you miracles. Washington flank, left flank. O'Malley's voice broke through my trance. I let go of Jenkins' hand. I grabbed the bastard from the mud. I wiped the action on my sleeve. I stood up. Something inside me had hardened. Before this, I was fighting to survive. I was fighting to prove them wrong. Now I was fighting out of pure, cold rage. I see 'em. I growled to no one. I lifted the rifle. The flares were gone, but a mortar explosion illuminated the tree line. I saw them regrouping for a second wave. I didn't wait for them to charge. I started walking toward them, firing from the hip, working the bolt, firing again. A rhythmic, mechanical dealer of death. Tech, get back here, Marcus yelled. I ignored him. I walked past the perimeter wire. I fired until the clip pinged empty. I reloaded in 3 seconds. I fired again. I was daring them to come for me. I wanted them to come. They didn't. The volume of fire, the ferocity of the defense broke their spirit. They melted back into the jungle, leaving their dead behind. Dawn broke 2 hours later. The gray light revealed the carnage. Bodies draped over tree roots. The smell of cordite and iron. I sat on a crate of ammo, cleaning my rifle. I methodically disassembled the bolt, oiling it, checking the firing pin. Corporal Miller walked up to me. He looked at Jenkins's body, which was being covered by a poncho. Then he looked at me. I expected a reprimand for leaving the foxhole. I expected a racial slur. Miller sat down next to me. He lit 2 cigarettes. He handed one to me. You keep saving our asses, Washington, Miller said quietly, and we keep letting you down. I took the cigarette. I inhaled deep, the smoke burning my lungs. We got 3 more days to the ridge, I said, my voice flat. Don't let me down again. Miller nodded. He looked at my rifle. That thing, it's a beast. It's just a tool, Miller, I said, snapping the bolt back into place. Just a tool. The man holding it is the weapon. I stood up. The platoon was looking at me. Not as a servant, not as a joke. They were looking at me like I was the only map out of hell. Let's move out, I said. And for the first time in the history of the 24th Regiment's attachment to that battalion, the white soldiers stood up and followed the black mechanic. By the 4th day, we weren't men anymore. We were hollowed-out shapes of mud and fatigue, fueled by benzodrine and terror. We had reached the base of the Razor, a steep coral rock ridge that looked like a jagged knife cutting the sky. The Japanese were dug in deep at the top. They had caves, spider holes, and machine gun nests that covered every inch of the approach. It was a meat grinder. Captain Reynolds, who had taken command after we linked up with another shattered company, looked at the slope, and then at his map. We have to take that ridge, he said, his voice void of hope. Headquarters says it overlooks the airfield. If we don't take it, the invasion fails. He ordered a frontal assault at 800. It went exactly how I knew it would. 2 platoons charged up the slope. The Japanese waited. They waited until our boys were exposed on the white coral rock, slipping and sliding. Then they opened up with the Type 92 heavy machine guns, the woodpeckers. The sound was a fast, stuttering, ripping noise. I watched through my scope from the rear. I saw men, good men, get cut in half. The assault shattered in 30 seconds. The retreat was worse. The wounded were left screaming on the rocks, used as bait. We can't go up there, Miller was crying, huddled behind a boulder. It's suicide. I looked at the slope. I didn't see a battlefield, I saw a math problem. The Japanese crossfire was perfect. They had overlapping fields of fire, but every system has a flaw. Give me your ammo, I said to Miller. What? Give me your 30-06 clips. And yours? I pointed to O'Malley. Tech, where are you going? O'Malley asked, handing over his bandolier. They're focused on the main trail, I said. pointing to a near-vertical sheer cliff face on the far eastern flank. It looked unclimbable. Nobody is watching that goat path. If I can get up there, I can see into their trenches. You'll fall, Miller said. Then I fall. Better than dying in this hole. I left the bastard strapped tight to my back. I climbed for 2 hours. My fingernails tore off. The sharp coral sliced my palms and knees to ribbons. I moved inches at a time, terrified that the sound of my breath would alert a sentry. When I finally pulled myself over the lip of the ridge, I was behind the enemy line. I was looking down into their main trench network. It was like an anthill. Officers with swords, runners carrying messages, mortar crews dropping shells down on my friends. They had no idea I was there. I was 70 yards away, slightly above them, hidden in a cluster of thick ferns. I unslung my rifle. My hands were shaking from the climb. I forced them to be still. I kissed the stock of the gun. "Don't fail me now," I whispered. I started with the heavy machine gun crew that was pinning down Baker Company. The gunner. Crack. Headshot. He slumped over the weapon. The loader froze, confused. Crack. Chest shot. The officer screaming orders. Crack. Throat shot. It was mechanical. It was cold. I didn't feel hate. I felt a terrible, icy clarity. I worked the bolt as fast as I could acquire targets. Clack, clack. Boom. Clack, clack. Boom. Chaos erupted in the trench. They didn't know where the fire was coming from. The echo off the canyon walls made it sound like I was everywhere. I reloaded. 5 rounds. 5 dead men. I targeted a mortar team next. 1 round into the pile of mortar shells stacked next to them. It wasn't a direct explosion, but the spark and the impact caused a panic. They scrambled, dropping a live round. Boom. The pit vanished in a cloud of smoke and dirt. I was counting in my head. 8, 9, 10. My shoulder was bruising black and blue from the recoil. The barrel of the Springfield was so hot I could smell the wood of the handguard beginning to char. The oil on the bolt was smoking, stinging my eyes. Then, I saw him. Across the ravine, on a parallel ridge about 200 yards away, a Japanese officer was pointing right at me. He had spotted the muzzle flash. He wasn't yelling, he was calm. He pointed at a soldier next to him who was holding a knee mortar, a grenade launcher. I swung the rifle. The soldier dropped the mortar shell into the tube. Thump. I fired at the officer. Miss. My hands were too slippery with sweat and blood. I cycled the bolt. The grenade was in the air. I could hear the whistle. I fired again. The officer went down, clutching his chest. 11. But the grenade landed. It didn't hit me directly, but it hit the rock shelf above my head. The explosion was deafening. It felt like a sledgehammer hit my entire body. The world went white, then red, then black. Rocks, dirt, and coral rained down on me. I was slammed against the ground. My ears were ringing so hard I couldn't hear my own scream. I tried to move, but my legs were pinned under a pile of rubble. I coughed, spitting out dust. I wiped my eyes. My vision was swimming. I looked for my rifle. The bastard was lying 3 feet away. The stock was cracked. The scope was hanging off by 1 ring twisted at a useless angle. And down in the trench, the Japanese were pointing up. They knew where I was. They knew I was hurt. A squad of 10 men began to climb the path toward me. They had bayonets fixed. They were coming to finish the job. I tried to pull my legs free. I couldn't. I was trapped. I reached for my belt. No grenades. My pistol was gone, lost in the fall. I dragged the broken rifle toward me. I ripped the useless scope off and threw it down the cliff. I checked the action. It was gritty with sand, but it cycled. I had 3 rounds left in my pocket. The first Japanese soldier appeared over the ridge, screaming, bayonet lunging. I didn't aim. I jammed the barrel into his stomach and pulled the trigger. Boom. He fell backward, knocking the man behind him down the slope. 2 rounds left. 9 enemies coming. I lay there, broken, bleeding, holding a cracked rifle, watching the sun begin to set behind the enemy. This was it. This was the end of the line for the mechanic from Mississippi. I thought about Miller. I thought about Jenkins. "Come on," I screamed, blood bubbling in my throat. "Come and get it." Here is Chapter 5. Chapter 5. The Cost of a Miracle. I had 2 bullets. There were 8 men left on the narrow goat path, scrambling over the body of the man I had just killed. They were screaming, a guttural, synchronized war cry intended to freeze the blood in my veins. It almost worked. My legs were dead weight, pinned under a slab of coral rock that felt like it weighed a ton. Pain radiated from my crushed shins, white-hot and blinding. I tried to heave the rock off, but my body had nothing left. I was a sitting duck, a broken piece of machinery waiting to be scrapped. "Come on!" I yelled again, the taste of copper filling my mouth. The next soldier crested the rise. He didn't have a rifle. He held a katana high above his head, the blade catching the dying sunlight. An officer. He was 10 feet away, closing the distance in 2 strides. I raised the cracked bastard. I didn't have sights anymore. The scope was gone, the front post bent. I pointed the shattered wood and hot steel like a shotgun. Breath. Squeeze. The recoil slammed the broken stock into my bruised ribs. The officer's face dissolved. He dropped like a puppet with cut strings, sliding down the shale, tripping the 2 men behind him. 1 bullet left. My ears were ringing so hard I couldn't hear the enemy anymore, only the thump of my own heart. I worked the bolt. It felt gritty, grinding against sand and blood. I slammed it home. The next soldier was smarter. He didn't charge. He stopped 5 yards away, raising his Arisaka. He was going to shoot me from a safe distance. I looked down the barrel of his rifle. I saw the dark hole where my death would come from. I aimed at his chest. It was a gamble. If I missed, I was dead. If I hit him, the 5 behind him would swarm me before I could reload. If I even had ammo to reload. We locked eyes. In that fraction of a second, I saw he was just a kid too. Terrified, angry, doing what he was told. I pulled the trigger. Click. A misfire. The cheap, mass-produced military primer had failed. The one variable I couldn't control. I stared at the rifle. My masterpiece. My bastard. It had held together for 5 days through mud and heat and abuse, only to fail on the very last pull. The Japanese soldier grinned. He adjusted his aim. He knew he had me. I dropped the rifle. I reached for a jagged chunk of coral rock. I wasn't going to just sit there. If I was going to die, I was going to die trying to cave his skull in. He tightened his finger on the trigger. Thud, 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 thud. The sound wasn't a rifle crack. It was the heavy, rhythmic chug of a Browning automatic rifle. Bar. The Japanese soldier danced. That's the only way to describe it. A line of .30-06 rounds stitched across his chest, jerking him violently to the right. He flew off the cliff edge, disappearing into the ravine below. I whipped my head around, straining my neck. Cresting the ridge behind me, silhouette against the smoke-filled sky, was a giant. Big Marcus. He was firing the bar from the hip, screaming something unintelligible, his face a mask of pure fury. And right beside him was Corporal Miller, firing his Thompson submachine gun, spraying lead down the path, suppressing the remaining Japanese squad. "Get some! Get some, you sons of bitches!" Miller screamed. They stepped over me, forming a wall of steel between my broken body and the enemy. The remaining Japanese soldiers, seeing the heavy firepower, broke. They turned and scrambled back down the path, sliding and falling in their panic. Miller turned to me. He dropped to his knees, his Thompson smoking. Tech, you alive?" I tried to speak, but all that came out was a dry cough. I nodded. "Help me get this rock off him," Miller yelled at Marcus. Marcus slung the hot bar over his shoulder and grabbed the slab of coral. His biceps bulged, veins popping against his dark skin. 1, 2, heave! The rock shifted. Agony shot up my legs, sharper than before. I screamed. Black spots dancing in my vision, they dragged me free, pulling me back from the ledge. "My legs!" I gasped. "They're broke, Tech. Both of them," Marcus said, his voice surprisingly gentle. He ripped open a med kit and stabbed a morphine syringe into my thigh. "But you keep 'em. You keep 'em." The morphine hit me fast. The sharp edges of the pain dulled into a warm throb. "Look," Miller said, pointing down into the main trench below. I propped myself up on my elbows. The distraction had worked. While the Japanese command had focused on me, the lone sniper on the cliff, and then on the rescue party, the rest of our battalion had pushed up the main slope. Without their officers, the ones I had picked off, and without their heavy machine gunners, the ones I had killed first, the Japanese defense had collapsed. American troops were pouring into the trenches. Flamethrowers were clearing the bunkers. The rising sun flag was being torn down from the command post. "We took it," Miller whispered. "We actually took the damn ridge." He looked at me. He looked at the carnage on the path, the bodies of the officer and the soldiers I had stopped. Then he looked down into the trench where I had killed the gunners and the mortar team. I counted, Miller said, shaking his head in disbelief. While we were climbing up, I was watching you through the binocs. You dropped 11 guys in 5 minutes, Tech. Plus the ones in the jungle, that's over 20 confirmed. 21, I mumbled, the morphine making my tongue thick. The officer on the cliff. Marcus chuckled, a deep rumble. You're a scary man, Elias Washington. My rifle, I said, reaching out. Miller picked up the bastard. He held it with reverence. The stock was split down the middle. The action was jammed. It was ruined. It's done, Tech, Miller said softly. She fought her war. They called for a stretcher. It took 4 men to carry me down that goat path. Every jolt was agony, even with the drugs. But as we reached the main trail, something happened that I will never forget. The white infantrymen, the guys from Baker Company, the ones who had laughed at me 5 days ago, the ones who called me grease monkey and boy, stopped. They stopped digging foxholes. They stopped eating rations. They stood up. As my stretcher passed, dirty, bloody, and broken, they took off their helmets. Someone murmured, "Good job, soldier." Another said, "That's him. That's the guy." I saw the lieutenant colonel standing by the jeep at the bottom of the hill. He watched the procession. He didn't salute. Officers don't salute enlisted men, but he stood at attention. Miller walked beside the stretcher, carrying my broken rifle like a trophy. "You know they're going to give you a medal for this," Miller said. "Maybe," I said, staring up at the jungle canopy now peaceful in the twilight. "Or maybe they'll just let me go back to fixing trucks. If they put you back in the motor pool," Miller said, lighting a cigarette and putting it between my lips. "Then I'm transferring to the motor pool too, because I ain't going nowhere without you watching my back." I took a drag of the cigarette. I looked at my hands. They were still black with grease and gunpowder. I was still a Negro in a segregated army. I knew that when I got back to the States I wouldn't be able to drink from the same water fountain as Miller. I knew the world hadn't changed, but we had changed. I looked back at the ridge one last time. We had taken the high ground, and for 5 days, with a rifle made of trash, I had stood taller than any of them. "Let's go home, Miller," I said. "Yes, sir," the white corporal said to the black private. "Let's go home." My legs healed, but the limp never went away. It became a part of my walk, a permanent reminder of the Coral Ridge. I didn't get the Medal of Honor. Those weren't handed out to men of my complexion back then, no matter how many lives we saved. I received a silver star, mailed to me in a cardboard box 6 months later, while I was back in a motor pool in Kansas changing tires on deuce-and-a-half trucks. Corporal Miller kept his word, though. He wrote to me every Christmas for 20 years. He told his kids that a wizard with a junk gun was the only reason they were born. The bastard, my rifle, was left on that hill. It was probably rusted into nothing by the jungle rain, reclaimed by the island. That's fine. It served its purpose. It taught me that the value of a weapon or a man isn't in the stamp on the receiver or the color of the finish. It's in the action. They laughed when I picked up the scrap metal. They stopped laughing when I cleared the way. In a world that wanted me to be invisible, I made sure I was the one thing they couldn't ignore. I was the mechanic who fixed the war.